Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to the York Civil War Roundtable. My name is Adam Bentz, and I'm the Assistant Director of the Library and Archives. And I think we have a great and very locally based presentation for tonight. So I hope everyone who's here in person and all our friends on Zoom and Facebook will enjoy it. Before I let Scott Rosenau introduce tonight's speaker, I'd just like to go through some coming attractions as we usually do. So if you can bear with me, I think there are some fun events that are coming up. We encourage you to participate in them. First off, this coming Saturday, April 22nd, we are participating in the Go Green in the City program, and we'll be offering tours and lectures. This is all taking place at the Colonial Complex, which you probably know where that is, but it's at 157 West Market Street in York. That will be running from 10 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon. So that's the Go Green in the City campaign, tours and lectures at the Colonial Complex. Okay, a week from tonight on April 26th at 7 p.m., we'll be welcoming the All Vets organization back, and they will have a talk from Dr. Benjamin Hoover II, and he'll be speaking about his time in the United States Army, 1967 to 1970, where he served as a major in the 33rd Field Hospital in Germany. So that's a week from tonight, the All Vets organization in this room at 7 p.m. On May 5th, we will encourage you all to take out your checkbooks or your credit cards for the Give Local York campaign, which we've been participating in for many years. Lots and lots of local nonprofits will be asking for your generosity. But aside of that, we'll be having lots of different programming going on and open houses here at the Historical Society Museum, also at the Agricultural and Industrial Museum on West Princess Street, and also the Colonial Complex. So please check our page. I put the details in here, but we'd be here for 20 minutes listening to it. So please check our page on the Give Local York webpage to see all the different events going on from the History Center that day. Following that, on Sunday, May 7th, the South Central Pennsylvania Genealogical Society will not be meeting in this room. They will instead be meeting at St. Luke's Lutheran Church at 2666 Furnace Road in Felton. That's St. Luke's Lutheran Church. And there will be a presentation by June Lloyd, our librarian emerita, and longtime York County History Center volunteer Gene Robinson, who will be talking about the history of St. Luke's Union Church Cemetery and also touring it. So that's on Sunday, May 7th, South Central Pennsylvania Genealogical Society. I think they meet at 2:30 in the afternoon. They also have details on their webpage about that. On May 13th, that's Saturday, May 13th, at 10:30 a.m. That's our second Saturday program, which will be the War in the East, Germany and Russia, 1941 to 1945. And it'll be presented by author and historian Ken Weiler, and that will be taking place here at the History Center at 10:30 on that second Saturday. And related to World War II, this group is the first public group that we're releasing this information to. So I'm kind of excited about this. I've been working with a colleague at the History Center for some time on this, but the History Center will be introducing a new program called World War II Briefings. And this will be a panel lecture series, which will happen twice a year, roughly in conjunction with VE Day and VJ Day each year. Our first event is timed with VJ Day, and it will be taking place on August 19th. And I know that's way off in advance, but if you're interested in World War II, as well as the Civil War, you might want to mark that down for August 19th. And our first panel discussion will be On Track for Victory, Armored Power of the Second World War. So if you're interested in that, please feel free to write it down, and if details will be forthcoming. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Scott Rosenau to come up and introduce tonight's speaker.
Thank you, Adam. Welcome, everybody. I'm glad to see the people we have here in house, and welcome to those watching on Facebook and Zoom. Just doing a quick preview of next month. Next month, we're going to have Scott Mangus presenting to us about spies and espionage in York County during the Gettysburg campaign. So these spies and is he referring to spies and secret agents like 007 or Austin Powers? No, not that. He states that during the 1863 Gettysburg campaign, both Union Army and Confederate Army employed paid, at times unpaid, volunteer scouts. Some of these men are well known in Civil War lore, others toiled in anonymity. Several Confederate agents operated in York County, particularly in the months before the invasion. Some were gathering intelligence from which to make professional maps showing key roads, farms, businesses in the county. These maps would be used by the generals to plan their movements, points of rendezvous, and places to gather supplies and fresh horses. More than 800 York Countyans lost horses to the oncoming rebels, despite often secreting the steeds in supposedly out-of-the-way locations such as Roundtable and northern York County. The farmers could not imagine the extent of the enemy intelligence about South Central Pennsylvania, which the network of spies and scouts had carefully developed. Scott Mangus has cobbled together many of the stories of these covert agents. We'll discuss what is known about their operations. Mr. Mangus is very familiar with us here at the York Civil War Roundtable. He's the author or co-author of nearly 30 books on the Civil War and Underground Railroad. Among his recent titles are on the Battle of Hanover, Lincoln Funeral Train, Battle of Chickamauga, and he's a co-author with Eric Wittenberg of a 2-volume series, If We Were Striking for Pennsylvania, about the movements leading up to the Battle of Gettysburg. The next volume 2 is coming out in June. Tonight, we're going to welcome Samantha Dorm. She's going to be talking about the U.S. Colored Troops of Lebanon Cemetery. Samantha Dorm is a grant writer, one of the driving forces behind the Friends of Lebanon Cemetery, which was created in December of 2020 to honor the early African-American community members of York County by remembering their legacies and sharing their stories. So let us welcome now Samantha Dorm and learn more about the U.S. Colored Troops of the Lebanon Cemetery.
Good evening and thank you. Hopefully I can manage our technology here without any problems. Trusting I'm just advancing forward with the top here, correct? So as we said, my name is Samantha Dorm and I am born and raised here in York County. History was never anything that I, quite frankly, was interested in. I'm a math science person. And in 2019, I had 2 family members that passed away. They were living in Westchester at the time, but of course from here. And they were going to be buried in Lebanon Cemetery. They purchased their plots in 1977. My grandparents are there on my father's side. My great grandparents are there on my mother's side. And other than that, I really didn't pay attention to the significance of Lebanon Cemetery, not only in what it meant to my family, but what it meant to York County and the role that it played. So when we talk about the Civil War, a lot of people in this area, they know about Gettysburg, they've heard the name Basil Biggs. And if you know the name Basil Biggs in Gettysburg, you know that he made his money in part by disinterring bodies after the Civil War for that creation of the National Cemetery. But in doing so, our colored troops could not be buried there because of segregation. And so he used his funds as well as partnered with some others in that area, and they purchased land so that they could bury those soldiers, those colored troops, with dignity and respect. The same thing holds true here in York County, as well as throughout the region. Lebanon Cemetery is located in North York, and I'll have a picture here shortly. Lebanon Cemetery is a historic Black cemetery. It was started in 1872 for the same reason, segregation. Families pulling together, purchasing land to be able to bury their loved ones with dignity and respect. It was that simple. So it was actually one of Scott Mengus's books. I was reading, I had just purchased from here at the History Center, and I was on an airplane on my way to Chicago for, of all things, a law enforcement conference. And I'm reading this book, and I could barely stay still in my seat because it started connecting the dots, not just to history, not just to Black history, but to my family. And we'd never had those conversations. It opened up a whole new door. The room that you're sitting in here now at the York County History Center has a timeline on the wall. York's Black history timeline. For those of you who are watching online, it is available in digital format online through the York County History Center. Please do take the time to review the timeline. It is a snapshot of York County history. I'm not a Civil War buff. I'm going to be talking about the people, the individuals who served during the Civil War as part of our colored troops, talking about their role with their family, their role in the community, and certainly will do my best to answer any questions here today. So when we start looking at our history, by our, I'm talking about Black history. You'll hear terms, certainly Black, African-American, colored. I'll use them all throughout this presentation. A lot of times it has to depend on the time frame or the years in which we're talking about. But just being able to find our story is extremely difficult, particularly when you go to different states. If you're talking about pre-Civil War and you're looking at census rolls, oftentimes African Americans did not have their name, or at least not a full name. If I'm looking for my family in North Carolina, sometimes we might have a first name and an age and sex. When I'm looking for my family in Tennessee who were enslaved, it may simply just say male, age, race. And then by 1870, 1880, we start connecting names to those same files. So for the information that we have, many times, again, it's difficult. Names often change. That was one of those revelations, again, in sitting and reading through some of the information in Scott's book, where once people crossed over the Mason-Dixon line, their name may have changed for a number of reasons. But again, it makes it that much difficult to do this type of research. We have two people with our board, with the Friends of Lebanon Cemetery, who are currently working on pulling more together on the stories of these individuals, as well as their roles, their units, where they served, what their unit was involved with. So that information will be available later this year, and maybe we can convince one of those folks who we have here today, Vanessa, to be able to come back and give that presentation at a later time, would be much more in depth. Yes, Vanessa, I did call you out. So pick a month and she'll be back with Miss Becky Inside, because they're uncovering tremendous information. So who we have here, this gentleman, Mr. Watson, is not interred at Lebanon Cemetery. He's actually in Wrightsville. But I wanted to give you an idea of just kind of the snippet of information that we're working with. George Watson was born in the Welsh Mountains of Lancaster County. So that stopped me, because I said, where's the Welsh Mountains? But it's listed as the Welsh Mountains of Lancaster County. His father served for 1 year during the Civil War. And then he and his 3 brothers all served after that. George Watson and 2 of his brothers were injured during the war. The 4th was not. Their names, George, Enoch, Thomas, and Nathaniel. They all returned back home after the war. So let's talk a little bit about how this all came to be that we had colored troops. So Congress passed an act in 1863 requiring that most men between the ages of 20 and 45 had to register for the draft. Of course, these ledgers are simply about the towns fulfilling their obligations. So there's a picture just to give you an idea of what a ledger may look like. Again, minimal information that we have here. By early 1863, voluntary enlistments in the Union Army had fallen so sharply that the federal government instituted then a very unpopular military draft, now including Black men. That is when we start with the USCT. Over 300 of York County's Black men were enlisted in the Army and Navy regiments. They served in over 20 different regiments. They're buried here in York County, some of them, in 6 different cemeteries. Lebanon Cemetery in North York being the largest. Mount Pisgah is in Wrightsville area. And then we have Fawn, Zion, Chanceford, and River Hills, which are all the southern part of the county. They're buried also in cemeteries in Dauphin County, Adams County, Cumberland County, Lancaster County as well. We have folks from York who are buried on the battlefields where they fall in South Carolina, Florida, and Virginia. There are some whose burial locations are not known, and some who are buried in other states or near hospitals where they may have died. I have here a link, just a reminder that again, in working with the York County History Center, there is a special collections listing that you can see for Civil War, and part of that special collections includes that listing of USCT. It is evolving, it is changing, it is being updated, in part because of the work of people like you in this room who are doing this type of research, working with Adam and his team at the History Center. We are updating those files as we come across information. Additional York County connections. So this is some information that Becky had put together in how they're kind of grouping some folks for the research that they're doing, and essentially saying, okay, we have 5 groups or 5 scenarios that we're talking about. We have those that were born in York, lived in York, died, and are buried in York County. That's one scenario. We have those who were born in York County, but lived, died, and are buried elsewhere. Okay, there are scenarios where you have those who were born in other parts of the country, but then later came to York County. And we're going to talk about some of those folks. Those who are listed in York County when they enlisted as their birthplace, lived here perhaps briefly, but then lived someplace else and died someplace else. So again, just trying to put together all these threads of information. And then those who claim to be from York County, but we have no documentation to back that up. The listing that is here was one that was put together back in 2019. I believe these names appeared in Yorkdale record, working a lot with information that Jim McClure was doing and some of the research coming out. But this just gave you some of the names. And as I said, this has been updated and has changed, but I wanted to give you an idea of this is when we started, when the Friends of Lebanon Cemetery started in 2019. Formally a nonprofit by 2020. These were the names that we had. And you're going to see a little bit later some of the work that we've done in that at times we have uncovered stones where all we have on that stone is a name, a date of birth, and a date of death. And through research, we found then that they may have served in the Civil War or in other conflicts. And so we do update this information regularly. Numerous Civil War veterans are interred at Lebanon Cemetery, as well as 5 servicemen who served during the Spanish-American War and many who served in various conflicts. The photo that we have here is a picture of the headstone for one of the names on the list, which is Mr. John Joyce. I am very open to questions, very flexible, so don't feel like you're interrupting. I'm more of a person where I like to have the conversation versus just being able to give that presentation. So if anything comes up, please do stop. So I wanted to throw this in here because we're going to talk a little bit about collaborations and as well as looking at some of the regional Civil War history and the links that we're making with our local cemeteries. And so we are working with one of the cemeteries, which is in Westminster, Maryland, where I have family members that are there, which is Ellsworth Cemetery. This is Carroll County. Many of those same families that are in Carroll County, Maryland, then came up through York County into Gettysburg, into Harrisburg area, into York County, and over into Lancaster. We're actually connecting families, putting their histories together through cemetery records. That's how we are tracing in part the migration of our African-American families through cemetery records. In regards to Civil War history, a lot of folks know the name David Busto Bowser from Philadelphia. Everything that you read says Philadelphia. And he is the person that painted the flags for the USCT, as well as painted some of the helmets for fire departments. I know that in Harrisburg, at their fire museum, they do have some of his original helmets. And they're also looking in York County to see if they have them here as well. These flags are being sold pretty regularly on the auction. You can see them online and they're going for a pretty hefty price. But everything we read says Philadelphia for him and his wife. One little problem with that. His family is actually from the Harrisburg area, and his wife, Elizabeth Harriet Stevens Gray, is from York, Pennsylvania. She was the daughter of Singleton Gray and Mary Gray, and they are both buried at Lebanon Cemetery. Their headstone is here. Does anybody else recognize the Gray name in York County and its significance? Go ahead, Scott.
Underground Railroad, of course.
Our Underground Railroad conductors. So the Gray family is entwined also with the Goodrich family, where Rhoda Gray married. I have to think about that. Glenn Alvin Goodrich. So the families again are very connected. And then when we talk about like the Harrisburg connection, as I said, the Busto family is in Harrisburg, but the sister of Elizabeth married Cassius Brown in Harrisburg, and he was also involved, his family's involved with the Underground Railroad. So we have Lincoln Cemetery in the Harrisburg area, as well as Midland Cemetery, where a number of the family members are there. So it's all the same folks involved initially with the Underground Railroad. Then you have family members serving during the Civil War. You have folks that are very active in the abolitionist movement. Then you move up to folks who were involved with the suffrage movement. And then you have the descendants actively involved in the civil rights movement, all in the same family. For my family at Lebanon Cemetery, that's 6 generations of family dating back to some who came here from Virginia in the 1840s. So Greenberry S. Robinson. The picture that you see here right now, the coin that's on top of this stone is from our current Secretary of Veterans Affairs. So back in, let me think about this, January for Martin Luther King Day, we hosted a program here in York for a new initiative known as Grace for Veterans. GRACE stands for Gravestone Recovery and Cemetery Engagement. Right? That cemetery engagement, the educational piece, the telling the stories of our folks in the cemeteries. So the secretary was here, and he was here to see the new headstones that we have placed for some of our veterans at Lebanon Cemetery. We have over 300 veterans. We placed 12 new markers last year for folks who served during World War I, World War II, and one that I believe also had died in Vietnam. And so I was asked to give a tour, private tour to the secretary and some of the undersecretary of Veterans Affairs. And this particular stone, it probably only sits maybe 1.5 feet above ground. And this was one of the first stones that we stopped at. And I told them that we were going to be talking about that day, Mr. Greenberry as Robinson, as part of the presentation. And the folks from Veterans Affairs, they looked at the stone and they said, ma'am, didn't you just place new stones? Yes. They said, well, why didn't you order him a new stone? And I looked at all of them and I said, because your policy says we can't, because technically he has one. And the secretary looked up at his people and he said, handle it. I'm not really sure what that means, but we'll still work with that. But he, he stopped and he put one of his challenge points there on the stone. And the speech that he talked about that day that he gave really just was honing in on the fact that for many years, our African-American veterans have been overlooked in many ways, not just during the times of segregation of the military itself, but oftentimes then in not receiving their benefits or the level of benefits as we would have seen. And that dates back to the time of the Civil War, which we're going to talk about here in just a moment. So a little bit about Greenberry Robinson. Greenberry S. Robinson was a Civil War veteran serving in a civilian status. He joined the 87th Pennsylvania Infantry as a cook and servant for Company A, but also assisted in the nursing of a large number of sick men while at New Creek, Virginia. He was taken prisoner during the Second Battle of Winchester on June 15th, 1863. And he made his escape, how? By being able to blend in with other African-American citizens in that area. He returned to his regiment, and then he goes on, he's transferred to Company A to the 39th with colored troops. And we see then a little bit about his story and what he did after the war, in that he was very active with the Masons. And so there are very few articles where we actually see his name. This is a snippet of one article here where it just talks about that he was actually being the marshal. He was the head of the procession here, and he was the marshal for this particular parade. And this took place back in 1875. So Greenberry S. Robinson. After the war, he served on the building committee for the AME Zion Church, the cornerstone of which was laid on October 24th, 1880. So October 24th, 1880, the AME Zion Church, that would have been the second location for the church. Does anyone have any idea where that church would have been located? The first AME Zion Church was in the 100 block of North Duke Street. This, the second location, would have been on the corner of King and Queen Street where the Bond building is currently at. So that would have been the second AME. The church today is Small Memorial AME Zion in the 400 block of South Queen Street. You guys are making this way too easy on me. Cyrus Johnson. So this was an interesting one. You see the stone here. This is all that we have at Lebanon Cemetery. We can see the date in which he died. We see his age, the month, and the number of days, 12 days. Back then, they would also add the date, the full days on there. So Mr. Cyrus Johnson was born in Liberty, Maryland, the son of Charles and Matilda Johnson. He died at his home at 323 North Court Street. He was married to Harriet, who died in 1903. It goes on to talk about how tall he was, and it describes his complexion. And then it says here that he was a Civil War veteran. He enlisted in York on February 2nd, 1864, and mustered in Harrisburg. One of the things that has taken place in regards to Cyrus Johnson in helping us with the research and building out this story. As I said, for our group, we had the headstone, and then this entry is in Find a Grave. So findagrave.com, which is a free open source, you can go on, you can look at any of the stones and to get some of this information as well. So for every visible stone that we have at Lebanon Cemetery, we have taken a picture. It is in the Find a Grave app. And then what we've done for those where we don't have a headstone, we are putting their obituary or any type of notification from the newspaper in, so at least we have essentially a placeholder to say that this person is there, they exist, and that they are important to us. So now we come back to those collaborations. I received one day an email from Nicole here with the library at the History Center, and she sent over a picture of Mr. Cyrus Johnson with his National Guard unit. So it has everyone's individual picture, and then it had the unit itself. And so this was our first time seeing a picture of this gentleman. We only had that headstone. And so from just that information, we posted on our Facebook page, which is Friends of Lebanon Cemetery, on the Facebook page, a picture of the headstone, a picture of Mr. Johnson, a picture of his wife, which we were able to get from the History Center here. I believe the History Center got the picture from the Fire Museum. They were going through some of the things that were literally just stored away. And I believe Nicole and Becky came across this picture frame of these people that had one black man, Cyrus Johnson. Now, during the Civil War, and actually probably up until about 1950, oftentimes our African Americans played more of a support role in the military. Seeing our post, we were contacted by the Pennsylvania National Guard, and they provided the following information just by looking at the medals that he's wearing, because as I said, the assumption is a support role because it says he was the cook, right? Here it says, the Medal with the Star is for his membership in the Grand Army of the Republic, a veteran organization for those who served during the American Civil War. The rectangle shape at the top indicates that he holds a leadership position in the camp that he belonged to. We had no idea. The smaller Keystone Medal with the pendant is the Veterans Marksmanship insignia. These were awarded after 5 consecutive years of qualification on the range. Using this as a clue, we can date Cyrus's enlistment in the National Guard of Pennsylvania to at least 1890 or 1891, depending on when this image was taken. The larger Keystone Medal is unidentified at present time. And certainly if anybody recognizes it, please reach out to our group or to the folks with the Pennsylvania National Guard. So this is just an idea of those collaborations. Here we were, Lebanon Cemetery. We put in a Find a Grave entry. We have a picture of a headstone. History Center contributes pictures of the individual, his wife, his unit. We post that information online, and the next thing we know, we're hearing from the Pennsylvania National Guard. And this is the type of response that we get. Yes, sir.
The GAR and the Masons were also segregated. Were they not?
That is correct. And we're about to see that in just a moment. So, this is a great point. So we have here Mr. John Noble. I have a picture here of the only stone that we have at the cemetery. It's in effect a family plot, so we don't actually have a headstone or marker indicating exactly where John Noble's at. We just know where the family plot is located, and then this is like in the center of the plot, and it says the John Noble family. Okay, Mr. John Noble was born in Havana, Cuba, and he died at home on the 100 block of East College Avenue. We keep talking about some of these addresses in part because this delves into some other research where we look at when you talk about African Americans here in York County. You may have heard the term redlining, where we know that African Americans were only allowed to live in certain parts of the city, let alone certain parts of the county. We can prove redlining by the cemetery records because we see addresses, condensed areas over and over again. So for Mr. Noble, he had gone to Connecticut and enlisted in Company B of the 23rd Connecticut Regiment of the U.S. Colored Troops and fought bravely during the Civil War. In 1891, he applied for a position as Minister of Liberia with the support of the Pennsylvania Secretary of Internal Affairs. He was not selected for that position, but he was in the running of that. Mr. Noble was one of the original chartering members of the Faith Presbyterian Church, which was an all-black congregation in the first block of North Duke Street. Faith Presbyterian Church later merged with First Presbyterian just across the street here. Mr. Charles Webster. So again, remember I said, history was never my thing. I had to ask what a cannery was. So Google helped me with that. Because we tried to look at, what did people do as far as what types of jobs did they hold? Where did they go to church? What maybe were even some of their hobbies and things on that line. And so this one it may be a little bit confusing because it says on one side Shipley Plantation, and then it also mentions the Buckley Plantation. We do know sometimes we had people that were at more than one location, and then also we had changes in names of plantation. So I do need to confirm that one, but I did want to point that out, that I know that that's on there with two different ones. He enlisted in the 25th United States Infantry, was a trustee for the Bethel AME Church, so not the small memorial church, but Bethel AME, and then employed at the Brocker Tannery here in Florida. So part of the question that we just had from Adam, we were talking about the Grand Army of the Republic. For our group, again, we were in the cemetery cleaning stones and uncovering stones, just taking care of our family. It wasn't about history. We were taking care of our families and using metal detectors. We start finding stones like this a few inches underground and having to reach out and say, what is this? What does this mean? What is the significance? Because for our Civil War soldiers, or for our earlier burials, many of them only had a wooden marker. Those markers are no longer there. And so we have many areas of our cemetery where it just looks like an open field, but we know there are people there. How do we know that? When the cemetery land was first purchased, it was only just under 2 acres. It's now over 5. But the reason that they bought more land is because, very bluntly, it said it's full. There's no more room. So we know we have people there. We don't know exactly where they're at, and we don't know who they are. Symbol. Which organization does this symbol represent?
Grand Army of the Republic.
I just gave it to you guys. That would be option B. So for those that are watching and maybe like me, didn't know. This was the Grand Army of the Republic. You can go online and pull information to review. Our local GAR was named for David E. Small, who is buried at Prospect Hill Cemetery. And then we talk about a lot of the connections between our cemetery and Prospect Hill. For instance, Mr. excuse me, Cyrus Johnson, other members of his unit are at Prospect Hill, but he's at Lebanon Cemetery because of the color of his skin. This just gives you one of the newspaper clippings where again, you can see then some of the names for our members for the Grand Army of the Republic, including John Noble, including Mr. Cyrus Johnson, including Lewis Robinson, Clinton Woods, Mr. Bowley. Mr. Bowley's name is spelled several different ways in different publications. So we always come back to confirm some of that information. I have a notice of his funeral is listed there as well. And many times, this is it, that we have no footprint on individuals until maybe possibly we have a funeral notice. Reverend John H. Hector. Reverend Hector, we knew of Reverend Hector, and then people would always refer to him as the Black Knight and didn't really know much more about Reverend Hector. There's a gentleman now living in North Carolina, Mr. Phil Merrill, who had been for years collecting pictures of John H. Hector and researching him, and had an opportunity a few years ago to finally come to York, Pennsylvania and visit the cemetery, and not just visit the cemetery, but visit the property where Reverend Hector lived. You'll see that on the next slide. So one of the things with Reverend Hector, it talks about that at the Battle of Shiloh, he was an attendant for Colonel Stewart of the 55th Illinois Regiment, and that he was holding on to the reins of General Grant's horse, and the horse stomped on his foot and cut open his foot. So he was known as a drummer boy, I believe, during that time. So you heard me just mention General Grant in connection to Reverend Hector. So just hang on to that for just a moment. A little bit more about Reverend Hector. His property was at 116 East King Street. 116 East King Street is currently the home of the Parliament Arts Building. Trying to see about getting a historical marker there, as well as others placed in other parts of the county. The window that you see up top is mentioned in his obituary. It talks about him sitting in that window, watching people go by when he passed away. This property, 116 East King Street, years later, is in the Green Book. And the person that is operating it as a Green Book location is a woman by the name of Etha Coles Armstrong. Etha Coles Armstrong, Green Book location, Reverend Hector, General Grant, got injured by the horse, got these connections, right? So then we get to Reverend Jesse S. Coles. The family says Coles. A lot of people will say Cows. I'm letting you know the family says Coles. And when you're researching, oftentimes you will find the name without the W. We also sometimes have found it without the L. Part of how we end up doing our research is by locking onto an address. I mentioned earlier about sometimes we were not afforded the use of our name. So you might have a situation where it says Negro at 115 East King Street did this. And so as soon as we have an address, we start researching by the address not by the name. Because usually the newspapers were going to get the address correct, even if they misspelled the name. So that's just a little search tip as you're working with some of these things. But as we were looking at Reverend Coles, we kind of tripped upon some information where here, the University of Virginia was also researching Reverend Coles. He's from Albemarle County, Virginia. And we were able to reach out to them. And in working with the History Center here, we've done a full document swap between York and Lancaster, York and Virginia. Everything they have, we have, and vice versa, to show the importance. So with Reverend Coles, I took this entry offline because I felt it was really important to emphasize what they were looking at. They were looking at two gentlemen. The other gentleman is by the last name of Lee. So in talking about Reverend Coles, this is on the Virginia website, University of Virginia website. Enslaved in Eastern Virginia on the eve of the Civil War, Coles made his way to the Union lines in 1862. The following year, at only 15 years old, he enlisted in the 29th Connecticut Infantry Regiment, those US colored troops. Coles also returned to Virginia as part of his military career, fighting in several battles. They were very specific when they were doing their presentations in saying he did not serve in a support role. He saw combat. And he was injured in battle very close to where he was from, there in Virginia. Years later, after the war, there's a newspaper article that is on file with the Library of Congress. And in that newspaper article, he's looking for his family. And he says, I would like to hear from my mother, Sarah Coles, who was formerly owned, there's that word, owned, by Reverend Samuel Blaine, Meadowfield Farm near Williamsburg, Virginia. And then it goes on to name his brothers and sisters, William Coles, Charles Coles, Carter Coles, Mildred Lewis, Josephine Coles, Martha Coles. He's looking for his family. And in finding this information and seeing the information that they had there in Virginia, we had this opportunity where it was like, oh my, he found his family. How did we know that? Because through the resources here with the History Center and in working with the archives in York, we have a copy of his will. And when he died in 1897, in his will, part of it says, box up my clothing and send it to, and he mentions two of his brothers. Through the work that we do with the Friends of Lebanon Cemetery, as I mentioned, we are researching the people. We are connecting the families. The family of Reverend Coles is still in this area. And we were able to share with them the story of their ancestors. Reverend Coles and his wife adopted two young girls, Etha Coles Armstrong, who later ran that greenhouse location, the Greenboat stop, excuse me, at 116 East King Street. Reverend Coles is also very connected with the history of General Grant, in that he was active in raising money for a monument for the general. There are so many different connections. The little snippet that's at the bottom here comes from something called the Dollar Bank. He was one of those early folks who put his money, his fund, into a fund through Dollar Bank and in working with the Freedmen's Bureau. Very active. He only served here in York for a little over 2 years before he passed away. But the legacy that he left through those young girls depicted on the wall here. Etha and Clara led our Negro subcommittee of the women's suffrage movement here in York County. Giving you an idea of the work that we do at Lebanon Cemetery. When we started in 2019, this is what Reverend Cole's stone looked like. So we work, the very last picture, it's actually brighter than that even today. If you get a chance to stop out at Lebanon Cemetery, please do. This coming weekend on Saturday, as part of Earth Day, all across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, there are sites that are going to be participating in this statewide cemetery cleanup, taking care of our African-American cemeteries, taking care of our USCT. That information is available online for the PA Hallowed Grounds. Lebanon Cemetery is one of those sites that will be participating. We'll have volunteers out from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. If you are unable to make it this week, or if you're obligated to other things, just know that our group is out every second Saturday of the month through November. This just gives you an idea of some of the work that we do. The flat markers, I don't have a real good one here. You can kind of see this picture here. Some of the flat markers were nearly 3 feet buried underground. We're on a hill and we have a lot of erosion and sinking. Since 2019, we have uncovered over 800 flat markers. Those flat markers, as I mentioned earlier, only will have a name, a date of birth, a date of death. And our volunteers, folks like Vanessa, as well as many others, have jumped in to put together these stories to connect families. This is a little bit of a bonus reel, and then we'll go to questions. Knowing what you all do and this interest, and seeing the books that are over here on the table, this grant comes out every year. I'm a grant writer by trade. It's known as the Veterans Legacy Grant. This is through the Department of Veterans Affairs. The Veterans Legacy Grant is currently open. You can apply for up to $500,000 non-matching to tell the stories of veterans in cemeteries. It must be one of their sponsored cemeteries through the Department of Veterans Affairs. One of those sponsored cemeteries in this area includes Prospect Hill Cemetery. You're already kind of doing some of that work. So what will this grant pay for? It will allow for things like books, films, graphic novels, educational manuals, as well as electronic database resources to be put together. We have an opportunity, if not this year, then certainly working on it for future opportunities, to build out these stories, to tell our story. We are a significant part of not only York County history, but American history. So I wanted to make sure that I would present that information as well as for those who are watching virtually. For information about Friends of Lebanon Cemetery, we do have a website, which is just www.friendsoflebanoncemetery.com. Our email address is here. You can go to, we use this one, but it's easier to just do info@friendsoflebanoncemetery.com. Apologize, I do know the phone number is correct here. So with that, are there any questions?
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
real quick question. The site is still marked, if I'm not mistaken, for no trespassing. Are you allowing people to come visit?
For the cemetery?
Yeah.
Okay, so Lebanon Cemetery, it says no trespassing. That is more for an evening thing. It's faded. We're looking for funds to get proper signage. So in order to work with law enforcement, we had to put a sign up that we had a lot of people coming at nighttime and doing some things in the cemetery they shouldn't be. So dusk to dawn, it is open, anyone can stop by.
Okay.
Absolutely. I mentioned that there is the information in the Find a Grave application. There's another app that we use, which is known Billion Graves, so billiongraves.com. If you download that app on your phone or a mobile device, when you're physically at the cemetery, you can put in a name and it will walk you to that site. And it's pretty accurate. It's usually at least within a foot, sometimes even closer. Yes, ma'am.
You guys saw just a few back on Rubber Holes headstone, and before you guys did the work on it, yes. What is the process that you do to get it to the end? And what is the time frame that usually takes to get it presented like that?
Sure, it is a process. So the question was, what process do we use to work on the stones to get them to look like this? For the most part, for instance, this weekend when we were out with volunteers, it'll be really simple. Water and a soft brush and some elbow grease. That's all we do. Just getting some of the algae and things off of the stones. Key being soft brush. You don't want to ruin the surface of the stones. And then you can see on the side here, our volunteers, we had some that have gone through some classes on preservation and things on that line. So we do use a D2 solution, and you spray it and you let it go. And over the course of the months, it will naturally be able to do the work so that it can get into that color. As I said, this doesn't do it justice. When you go there now, it really sticks out because it's bright white as if it was brand new. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
And this isn't a comment on the program itself, but an acknowledgement of your comfortableness in using different terms like African American and Black and Negro and color. A couple of years ago, during COVID, I wrote an article to the York Daily Record, and I was honoring the colored letter carrier of my childhood in 1944. And when I described him, I used the word color, and in parentheses, I said the word used at the time.
Yes.
The editors of the York Daily Record didn't like that. The only word they changed in my entire article was that. So yes, York Daily Record pissed me off.
Yeah, people can be very touchy about the terms, and I can't speak for everyone. I only speak for myself.
Yeah.
But I know, again, enjoying the research. So for those of you that didn't hear the question, it had to do with terminology like color or Negro, Black, African American. What's appropriate? Truly, depending on not just the time, but also the location. I came across one the other week. I posted this on Facebook where we talk about the Negro Baseball League in Pennsylvania. But I was looking at some of the teams that were in Tennessee, and out there they referred to them in a newspaper as the colored nines. And it took me a while to realize that the colored nines were baseball. So you have to use the terminology from that time in the research as far as what's appropriate. Now, walking up to someone today and say, oh, we don't do that. And to give you another instance, I worked at York Hospital in the early 90s. I was in the blood donor center. I was the only person of color that worked there. And we were up on the 7th floor of the unit, and an elderly gentleman came in. He couldn't see me in the room. And when he came in, he asked my coworker, he said, where's the colored girl? And my coworkers, who were all white, were just like, I wasn't offended. I wasn't offended, one, because I recognized him. He was older, and he actually was coming to thank me for taking care of his wife. That was the term that he grew up with. So sometimes it's not about the word, it's the intonation or the inflection of how people are saying it, because you can say African American in a very derogatory way, as well as any other word. So again, I'm only speaking for myself, but when I do this type of work, it's important that we go with the terms of the time. Thank you very much for inviting us. I know that you guys are gonna love when Vanessa and Becky come back and really dig in on the history with these folks as it relates to the war. So I appreciate all that you're doing. And thank you in helping us to tell our stories and to learn our stories about our families. We appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, thank you all for coming out tonight. For everybody who's joining us online, we'll see you next month. And we'll be listening to Scott's presentation on spies and secret agents and all sorts of things. But thank you all very much, and thanks so much for your presentation tonight, Sam.
Thanks. Sam, the reason I asked is I'm actually getting underground river on Tuesday to staff of our church. And I wanted to take them into the cemetery. And one of my friends